Last year, Martin Connell and his family bought their very first home in Boynton Beach, Florida.
He took one look at the ceiling and said, it's going to have asbestos.
Like a lot of Americans, the Connells thought asbestos had been banned years ago. So what happened?
Some 60 or so countries in the world have totally banned the use of asbestos. But here in the United States, it is still legal.
You live in a home, you put up a shelf, you hang a photo, you put a hole in the wall. You're now being exposed.
Times Square, May 1st, 2010. Smoke comes from a parked car. Police discover a homemade bomb. It smolders, but doesn't go off. Disaster averted. Good luck stops only a handful of attacks. But an increase in online commerce over the last few years is making law enforcement's job much harder, especially when someone wants to build a homemade bomb using online stores to gather lethal ingredients.
But certainly you're going to have people who are going to say, you shouldn't be monitoring what I purchase on Amazon.
All security is some form of violation of privacy. But let me tell you, if you have 1,000 people killed in New York City or Washington, the pendulum will swing the other way.
Almost every major city in America is wrestling with an affordable housing crisis. Companies like Airbnb are often blamed for driving up costs, driving out residents, and turning homeowners into criminals.
I do worry about the outcome, and I do worry about breaking the law, but there comes a time when you have to say, I have to do what is best for me.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. It used to be called the magic mineral, the strange fire-resistant fibers known as asbestos that are found in natural rock. By now, most people know asbestos has proven to be a major health hazard. The World Health Organization says half of workplace cancers worldwide are caused by asbestos, and several thousand deaths each year are attributed to asbestos in the home. So you might be surprised to learn that asbestos is still being used in many products today, including in our houses. That's today's cover story.
Last year, Martin Connell and his family bought their very first home in Boynton Beach, Florida. The day after they closed the deal on the house, a contractor they hired for renovations bore bad news.
He took one look at the ceiling and said, it's going to have asbestos.
It's like a popcorn ceiling?
Yeah, the spray on popcorn. So he took a sample, called us back a few hours later and said it tested positive. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do for you.
More tests found more asbestos.
The house was covered with it.
Yeah, so they had to come in and they had to take out every piece of drywall. Everything had to come down. So this was the kitchen. This was a laundry room. The bathrooms basically are demolished. A lot of the AC work got damaged during it. All the insulation had to come out.
What room was this?
The master bedroom.
But you did a home inspection and it didn't turn that up.
Correct. Here in the state of Florida, the asbestos inspection is not part of a pre-real estate purchase inspection.
And you're a firefighter. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have any idea about that?
Nobody seems to have any idea about it. The contractors that I'm talking to, they have no idea about it. I was calling senators' offices, congresswomen and men's offices. Nobody had any clue that asbestos is still here in Florida, that contractors are allowed to build with it here in Florida.
This is more than the story of one family's disaster. It turns out a hodgepodge of laws and regulations across the country mean many homeowners could find themselves in the very same boat.
Like a lot of Americans, the Connells thought asbestos had been banned years ago. So what happened?
The small mineral fibers of which it's composed have filled people with enthusiasm because despite their being soft as silk, they're as solid as granite and can be used in many different applications.
Fire-resistant asbestos became a multi-billion-dollar industry and was used in thousands of products in construction, shipyards, and households.
In big production at a Rochdale plant is a new material likely to play a useful part in fighting fire. It's an aluminized asbestos cloth.
The history and dangers of asbestos have been documented in numerous videos and films, like Evil Dust.
It was seen as a magic mineral, and the use of millions of tons of asbestos created a successful and very profitable industry. even though that selfsame industry was well aware that asbestos was extremely dangerous.
According to the World Health Organization, all forms of asbestos can cause cancer when people breathe the fibers into their lungs. By the 1980s, there were so many asbestos cancer victims, chemical companies started up massive asbestos trust funds to pay injured workers and their families. Today, about 60 companies have set aside more than $30 billion.
It is not a product that anybody ever needs to use anymore.
Dr. Arthur Frank is a professor of public health and medicine at Drexel University in Philadelphia. He always keeps an asbestos sample on hand, sealed in plastic for safety.
People think that asbestos is now no longer either used or legal in the United States, which is not true. But some 60 or so countries in the world, some going back more than 30 years now, have totally banned the use of asbestos, and that number keeps growing. But here in the United States, it is still legal. The Environmental Protection Agency in 1989 tried to ban the use of asbestos. The industry fought it, took it to a particular circuit court in the federal system that was friendly to industry, and the ban was overturned, so that it remains in this country a legal and usable product.
That means today, asbestos is still found in products from ironing board covers, toasters, and hair dryers to bowling balls, and in a lot of homes.
It could be in the form of asbestos floor tile, it could be pipe wrap in the basement, it could be insulation around the boiler, it could be blown-in insulation in the attic, or sheets of asbestos that were unrolled. I suspect that most home inspectors don't think to look for it, in part because it's not required, as it should be, under retail sales contracts for homes.
We sought interviews with representatives of the asbestos industry, but couldn't find anyone willing to talk to us. In the past, an industry spokesman said it's possible to use asbestos in a controlled and safe fashion. We have known for many years that asbestos can be safely and securely bound in today's products as long as carefully controlled manufacturing and installation processes are employed. This worker safety video from Canada, which used to be a major producer of asbestos, implies there's only risk when the asbestos products are broken open.
The hazard exists when undertaking a renovation or demolition. The danger is releasing the asbestos fibers into the air.
Martin Connell says he wasn't willing to take a chance.
You live in a home, you put up a shelf, you hang a photo, you put a hole in the wall. You're now being exposed. You're going to live there for the next 30 years. You're exposing yourself and your family over the life of, over you living there, the 30 years.
The question is how they would pay to clear their new home of asbestos.
Did insurance pay for any of this?
Insurance does not cover anything asbestos related in the state. The state of Florida allows contractors to build with asbestos. The state of Florida writes the insurance policies that will not cover anything asbestos related.
For the Connells, the costs are enormous. On top of the mortgage for their $262,000 home they couldn't live in during renovations, they had to pay rent for an apartment plus $250 a month to extend the lease. That doesn't count the cost of the asbestos removal.
You know how much money this is going to cost you when it's over?
We're probably going to be almost $50,000 when we're done.
Where are you getting the money?
Loans and credit cards.
Davina, you thought you were getting into a great house. What's it been like for you?
It's just sad. The kids really wanted to come home and pick their rooms and decorate, and we thought it was going to be minimal stuff, and we're technically starting from scratch. We're rebuilding our home.
The EPA announced in 2016 that it was evaluating asbestos risk as required under a law passed 2 years ago, but wouldn't tell us where they are in that process. Ahead on Full Measure, terrorists are buying bomb-making materials online. Scott Thuman takes a look at how e-commerce is posing a new challenge for law enforcement. Earlier this year, 17-year-old Mateen Aziza Uran was arrested in Texas and charged with plotting an ISIS-inspired mass shooting. Authorities say he learned about the Islamic extremist terrorist group on the internet, where he studied guides for making bombs. The case highlights the fact that today most anything can be bought anonymously online. when it comes to terrorists building homemade bombs, Scott Thuman reports e-commerce is a game changer.
Sometimes all that separates an ordinary day from a deadly one is luck. Times Square, May 1st, 2010. Smoke comes from a parked car. Police discover a homemade bomb. Firecrackers, gasoline, propane, and fertilizer designed to devastate one of the nation's busiest public spaces. It smolders, but doesn't go off. Disaster averted. Good luck stops only a handful of attacks. More often, it's dedicated police work that's breaking plots. But an increase in online commerce over the last few years is making law enforcement's job much harder, especially when someone wants to build a homemade bomb using online stores to gather lethal ingredients.
The internet makes things much more complicated. The internet, in a way, is an enabler.
Ron Hosko is a former assistant director with the FBI.
We have to know, we have to recognize that the FBI is at different places in the internet. They are looking at different locations. They're looking at websites and chat rooms where they have the right predication, but it makes it harder because we're talking about millions and millions of transactions. What stands out? What sets off a flag? What raises a flag? That makes it harder for the FBI to do its job.
It's also a concern across the Atlantic in Britain, a country with a long history of attacks.
I think we need to get real. You know, if you want to go and buy all the equipment for a bomb, I think the police need to know that.
Chris Phillips, the former head of Britain's counter-terrorism security office, to halt bombings by the Irish Republican groups, helped create a system called Know Your Buyer for retailers to report suspicious people who came to stores looking for chemicals.
The bombs that went off in London 15 years ago actually came from a hairdressing salon, the basic components. And we ran a campaign with them to make sure that they were prepared to come forward to the police if they had suspicious purchases. Shouldn't we do that with Amazon? Shouldn't we do that with the companies that are selling online? Because nowadays you don't need to go into a hairdressing salon to buy your peroxides. You can do it online. So surely when unusual purchases are made, then those companies should be informing the police.
He suggests when a customer buys multiple products that even only in theory could be combined into a bomb, that retailers should alert authorities.
But certainly you're going to have people who are going to say, you shouldn't be monitoring what I purchase on Amazon. This is a violation of my privacy.
Of course it is, but all security is some form of violation of privacy, and it's deciding where that pendulum is going to sit. Now, at the moment, I would suggest it's probably sitting quite firmly in the freedoms side. But let me tell you, if you have 1,000 people killed in New York City or Washington or one of your big cities, the pendulum will swing the other way.
He said, no, I want the one with hydrogen peroxide. I said, that is the one with hydrogen peroxide.
Back in the U.S., the FBI has set up a system of so-called tripwires, partnerships with merchants to flag suspicious buys. They're taught, for example, to look for customers paying only with cash, using out-of-state ID, or unable to explain the reason for their purchase. And vehicle rentals, too, like the one allegedly made last year by Sayfullo Saipov, who's now on trial after he rented a Home Depot truck. The accused jihadist from Uzbekistan was charged with plowing through a New York City bike path, killing 8. And sometimes companies don't want to cooperate.
We've got a long rifle in the street.
After the San Bernardino attack at an office holiday party that killed 14 people, Apple cited customer privacy, refusing the FBI access to the suspect's iPhone. Eventually, they had to hack into it, a position Hosko says companies may come to regret.
Corporate America will know, if I saw these indicators and I did nothing, what's the risk to me of that? What's the risk of doing nothing? What's the risk of ignoring what are clear indicators standing in front of me in my shop? Someone who wants to rent, someone who wants to purchase, someone who is acting strangely in a deeply troubling way. What's the risk to my corporate brand then if I do nothing?
And Sharyl, FBI sources tell us that more companies are cooperating than you might think. As America's largest e-commerce retailer, we reached out to Amazon for comment. They didn't want to discuss whether or not they have specific policies for monitoring specific purchases, but they did say, quote, We regularly work with law enforcement in responding to properly issued legal process.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot, Scott. And coming up on Full Measure, vacation rental sites like Airbnb are often blamed for pitting communities against renters. To regulate or not? That is the question. Summer vacation season is here, and for millions of Americans and foreign visitors, the challenge is finding an affordable short-time rental. Once, hotels or relatives were the only choices. Now in many cities, there's a battle between two major industries over a place to stay. Our Lisa Fletcher went to New York City for the story.
In the city that never sleeps, finding a place to do just that without breaking the bank and the law is a daunting task for tourists and for tenants.
I do worry about the outcome, and I do worry about breaking the law, but there comes a time when you have to say, I have to do what is best for me, what makes most sense for me financially.
Many New Yorkers with extra space, like Jordan Reeves, walk a fine legal line when they use home-sharing sites to make ends meet. It's been nearly a decade since state lawmakers banned rentals of fewer than 30 days, unless the owner is present, in what's called the, quote, multiple dwelling law. A law some Airbnb hosts say may sometimes be overlooked.
All of a sudden we went from living paycheck to paycheck to being able to go out to dinner once a week or go to see a movie or maybe see a Broadway show, which is why you live in New York City anyway.
Despite the legal limits, Airbnb has seen its value skyrocket to $31 billion. That's more than the hotel chains Hilton and Hyatt combined. The company is facing regulations on a city-by-city basis. Just this week, Los Angeles moved to regulate Airbnb by barring people from renting houses and apartments that are not their primary residence. A move Airbnb says is a positive step in the right direction. But the company was also the focus of a Federal Trade Commission investigation. Senators Elizabeth Warren, Dianne Feinstein, and Brian Schatz said they are, quote, concerned that short-term rentals may be exacerbating housing shortages and driving up the cost of housing in our communities. The report went on to cite that, quote, 72% of unique units rented in New York City appeared to violate local and state law. It's why lawmakers in the Big Apple, with its record of 60 million tourists last year, say their city needs to become the urban epitome for home sharing.
I'm in the middle. I don't hate the hotel industry. I don't love Airbnb, but I think it's something whose time has come.
State Congressman Joseph Lenthal represents the popular borough of Brooklyn. He wants to get rid of that multiple dwelling law. Instead, permitting hosts to rent one unit at a time, their home, and requiring them to register in a state database.
There are a lot of things to do in the outer borough that a lot of people want to see, and when they come to New York, and they're doing it now. They're coming, but they don't know if it's legal or illegal, and a lot of the home sharing people are scared because they don't understand what the law is, what they can do and what they can't do. We want to clarify what it is.
Left up to the hotel industry, it would be as limiting as possible. It backs a group called ShareBetter that uses hidden cameras to infiltrate host homes. The New York Times obtained internal documents from the American Hotel and Lodging Association that lay out a wide-reaching campaign to defeat Airbnb at state houses across the country and in the media. Airbnb is fighting back hard. In New York, it spent $404,000 in the first half of 2017 just on lobbying the state's lawmakers. New York State Assemblyman Joseph Lenthal says a real bill needs to pass.
And
if it doesn't pass, what does that say?
It says that the lobbyist won the lobbying against it. And that would be sad because that happens in Washington all the time, doesn't it?
What's the status of the bill?
Right now, the state of New York has not voted on the legislation, but the state comptroller just came out with a new report that says Airbnb is actually costing residents money and that it drove up the cost of rent by about $616 million in 2016.
With all these local actions, is there anything that someone's trying to do at a congressional level?
Well, given the number of congresspeople that we talked to that are involved in this, you would think so, but we haven't seen any evidence of it.
All right. Very interesting. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Next on Full Measure, we reported first how home DNA test samples may be used for more than just tracing your roots, how it may have cracked a decades-old cold case. Next. Today's Follow the Money. Fuel theft is out of control in Afghanistan. From 2010 through this year, the amount of U.S. tax dollars spent supplying fuel to Afghan military and police adds up to $3.2 billion. More than $154 million worth of it has been stolen. That's according to a new report from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, who says insurgents and terrorists are profiting from the theft. The IG says the U.S. military hasn't developed methods to effectively track fuel usage and corruption in Afghanistan. A few weeks back, we told you about how samples you submit for home DNA test kits could be used to build a growing DNA database. For the first time, such a database may be responsible for catching a killer. Police say they identified the alleged Golden State Killer by running old crime scene DNA through a gene site database. The suspect wasn't in the database, but a distant relative was, and the partial DNA match eventually led to 72-year-old Joseph D'Angelo. The former police officer is suspected in 12 murders and dozens of rapes. The gene site says its fine print discloses that DNA could be used by law enforcement. Next week on Full Measure, all of our correspondents will be here and we'll share our favorite moments and stories of the season.
We have been in court trying to pry those documents out of the Department of Justice, and still to this day, they will not give us those documents.
Is Congress broken?
Congress doesn't stand up for itself.
Do you think a lot of people come to Washington planning to work for their constituents and just find out can't be done?
I absolutely think most members come here with the best intentions.
I've not heard another sitting member of Congress talk about these things. What happens to you now because of this?
You know, I didn't come here with any friends, Cheryl, and I'm not going to leave with any friends, and I'm okay with that.
So we just heard a series of shots fired, not 100 yards away.
In some respects, you're outgunned or outmanned.
So now I'm going to go back into the server room now that that surveillance camera has been hacked. And the surveillance camera that's been hacked has a frozen image of a clean room.
They were given sexually transmitted diseases in a project championed and funded by the U.S. Public Health Service.
Do you realize right away, this is incredible?
I'm a historian of medicine, so there are a lot of horror stories.
Highlights you'll want to hear about next week. Until then, we'll be searching for more stories to hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.